This episode is brought to you by Honda. When you test drive the all-new Prologue EV, there's a lot that can impress you about it. There's the class-leading passenger space, the clean, thoughtful design, and the intuitive technology. But out of everything, what you'll really love most is that it's a Honda. Visit honda.com/EV to see offers.
Salah. Escape Cancelo. Oh, it's brilliant from Mo Salah. And still, Salah. Oh, sensational! Son had a goal and scored a beauty.
Oh, what a strike from Yuri Tielemans.
De Bruyne. And it's Ward-Prowse. Martinelli, gorgeous. Still going up. Oh, he's done it again.
And City have won the Premier League. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, EPL Index proudly brings to you the best prediction podcast in the world, A Tad Predictable, with your host, Tadiwa Chanakira, and his guest, Brighton fan Joe Sayers.
It's game week 2, and you know what that means. It's time for another brand new episode of A Tad Predictable. The season is finally here. We got that first game week out of the way. I know for fantasy football players, it was a nervous time with the 500 million drafts that you guys did. But from our perspective, it was good to sort of get the dust off the shoulders, predict some games, see how they transpired. But on this episode, obviously game week 2, it's fitting that our first fixture of the weekend also features the team of our guest this week. It's Joe. Joe, obviously Brighton fan. Welcome to the show.
Hello, yeah, good to be here. Excited to chat all things Brighton and all things Premier League. Should be good.
Yeah. As I was saying to you before we started recording, it's always good having fans from as many of the Premier League teams as we possibly can on the show, and we pride ourselves in that, just to give our main fan base and new fans coming on board an idea of how everyone's feeling, how every team is feeling. It's always nice to hear from those fans than necessarily hearing from the same fans every single time. And two, it seems like from a Premier League perspective, there is always a bias towards the bigger teams, I find. So it's nice to hear from everyone in the league. I want to hear from anyone and everyone in the Premier League, as long as they're obviously speaking sense and being cordial about it. But later on in the show, I'm going to give you a chance to sort of take the reins and walk us through sort of a Brighton State of the Nation address. But so maybe this time you might have to rein it in, because as I mentioned, it is the first fixture for this game week. It's Brighton. They'll be hosting Man United. And obviously Brighton, they had that 3-0 win against Everton. We know it's the last season at Goodison Park, so maybe you were expecting quite a raucous atmosphere and welcome there. But from my perspective, Brighton looked comfortable and end up winning that game. Obviously facing a Man United side who probably one of the clubs with the biggest pressure on the manager. In terms of, there were questions about him before the season even started, whether or not he was going to be the manager. And I'm sure your former manager was part of those conversations, perhaps. What do you make of this fixture for Brighton so early in the season? And what did you make of their performance against Everton?
So I don't think the Everton game was probably as comfortable as what people were maybe thinking with Brighton. I think we had to suffer a lot. I know that Jason Still came out after the game and sort of spoke about having to draw on some experienced players to get us through the tough moments, to get the opportunity to go 2-0 up and to go 3-0 up. So I think that shows a really good side of what we can do. We can play poorly and still win 3-0. I think we could be on for a really good season. And yeah, going ahead to Manchester United, I think their game against Fulham, they could have easily had a few goals conceded against them on the counter-attack. And I think had you have had a few more effective players like Karim Matoma, like Yankuba Minta, attacking their back line on that game, they probably would have scored quite a few. So I think that draws quite positively into going into this weekend, that we can really attack them I think another thing as well is the statement that it could be made with Fabian Hertzler in, saying to people, I'm here to compete. My age isn't a factor, and people can stop talking about that now because he's got the credentials to be Brighton manager, and he's here for a reason. He's not here for his age, although people are saying it's the most Brighton signing ever. A young guy with potential. He is here for a reason. So I think we could make a huge statement against Manchester United and hopefully win that game. And people can just talk about Fabian Hertzler as a manager who can compete with the big boys.
It almost feels like a trope, doesn't it? A lazy trope to mention his age. I always take on board any comments that come after that with a bit of skepticism, because it almost feels like someone that doesn't know what else to say about him. He's young. Okay, great. Everyone can see that. But what is he going to bring to the club is more important from my perspective. I think looking at the opportunities that Fulham had, as you mentioned, and looking at how high your wide players were in that game against Everton and how sort of intentional you were with your counter-attacking football, I can see how you guys can cause Man United problems in this game. I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be an exciting game. Do you feel, because obviously Man United, I think, stylistically preferred to play on the counter-attack, do you feel Brighton will be confident enough to be sort of ball dominant in this game and try and win it that way and be able to handle whatever's coming from Man United from a counter-attack perspective?
I think that's one of the main concerns, really, that we are quite susceptible in the counter-attack when we do have players sort of bombing forward and our fullbacks being so high. We sort of like to overload the box with two midfielders. And again, you could see that, the quality of Manchester United or the quality of any other team like Liverpool, Arsenal, Man City, example, would just overload our midfield and they would get us that way. So there are concerns from our perspective, but we hope and we think that Fabian Hertzler is flexible enough to make sure that he isn't putting our fullbacks that high against Manchester United or teams that can really, really hurt us on the counter, and that we're playing a little bit more sort of structured and in a way that we can react to the strengths that they have. But we can also still play to our strengths when we're allowed to. So I don't think it's going to be a case that we're going to sort of sit back. I think we're still going to want to play our football, but I think we'll be a bit more pragmatic about how we go about that.
Yeah, that should make for a really good tactical battle from that perspective. It's time. I may have been stalling you there with that second follow-up question, but you do have to give a prediction now. Your first one on a tab predictable. What do you foresee this game?
Yeah, as I say, if we play our way and we hit Man United on the counter attack as effectively as we were hitting Everton on the counter attack, but I know that might not be the case. That Manchester United could probably defend better than Everton can. I'm going to go for a 3-0 win for the Albion. I think we're going to make a big statement. All
right, I like that. Nice and confident. You've gone 3-0 to Brighton in that one. I'm going to go 2-1 to Brighton. I'm going to go with you in terms of scoreline. I'm not necessarily going to be as bold as you are. I do appreciate you being bold, and I like that. I think Man United do at least get one on the counter-attack. One of the difficult things with a new manager coming in is defending in transition. That's usually one of the last things that a team is able to sort of piece together, because you have to remember where you're meant to be a lot harder than when you've been with that manager for a lot of time and it's almost second nature. And I do think Man United can get you guys with some quick passing on the counter attack, but it still ends up with a Brighton win there. So we've both gotten Brighton wins. I think that's a great start for you on the podcast. Hopefully it makes you feel more comfortable. Let's move on to the next fixture. It's Crystal Palace versus West Ham. Two teams that lost this past weekend. Crystal Palace probably the hipster's choice to be a dark horse for one of those European spots? I mean, they ended last season really, really well. And then West Ham, we know in recent history, they've been in and around the European spots. They've done a lot of business this summer. How do you see this one shaping up?
I mean, it's a tough one, isn't it? Two teams that are coming off the back of a loss in game week 1 and two teams that are going to want to react this weekend. Obviously, I have the rivalry with Crystal Palace to bear in mind. I don't know if any bias is going to slip into my mind here.
But never would happen, right?
If I take that away for a second, if I take my Brighton tinted glasses off, they did end last season incredibly well, and Glasgow did have them, getting really good results. So if they can keep Mark Grahey, if they can keep Eze, and get playing the way they were last season, I could see them beating West Ham. I don't think West Ham were absolutely incredible against Aston Villa, obviously losing, and that they did have the game tied at one point. But is Lopetegui as good as what people are trying to think that he will be at West Ham? Probably not. I don't think he convinces me at all. So unfortunately, and sorry, Brighton fans, if you're listening to this, but I'm probably going to have to predict a Crystal Palace 1-0 win, which feels incredibly dirty. But I think Mateta will get scoring goals again, and I think that will start with this weekend. So yeah, 1-0 Palace.
Well, I'd like to officially say bye to the Brighton fans that had joined us. Obviously, they won't be loving that scoreline. Look, I get where you're coming from, and I think from Crystal Palace's perspective, it starts and stops with how long they can keep Mateta on the pitch, especially with Olise gone. I think him. Obviously, I'm not taking anything away from Eberechi Eze, but I just think he's been such an informed striker at the moment that the longer they have him on the pitch, the greater chance they have of being successful in games. And then from a West Ham perspective, you mentioned the Lopetegui thing. For me, it doesn't feel like he's a West Ham manager. I don't know if you get the same feeling, but when I think West Ham, I'm not thinking Lopetegui. I'm not thinking of a very, because he's very deliberate, very tactical, he is ball possessive, but risk averse with his ball possessive nature. It just doesn't seem to mesh well, but I guess there have been changing quite a lot of things at the club, including maybe some of the signings that they have been making in recent seasons. So I guess maybe it is the new West Ham. I don't know if Mateta gets the 90. I think he probably gets to 60 in this one and then continues on. I've gone with the 1-1 draw. So yeah. Brighton fans, you can start coming back. I'm trying to claw some of them back that may have muted us for a little bit there. But yeah, I just think these are two teams that obviously, yes, they want to bounce back from what we saw from them last week in terms of a results perspective. But I think they're just going to cancel each other out. I wasn't all too impressed with either of them, despite, the result. You can lose a game and still look impressive. And we'll obviously get to the likes of an Ipswich, who looked really good in the first half against Liverpool, and Leicester, who looked good in the second half against Tottenham. So you can still not get the result that you want, but still look impressive. For both teams, they almost seem bland, which is surprising for two teams that have been, as I've mentioned, challenging for those, or West Ham certainly challenging for those European spots, and Crystal Palace finishing the season so hot last season. I hope for their sake the Olise loss isn't as big as it might turn out to be, but I guess we will wait and see with that one. But let's move on to the next fixture. We've got Fulham versus Leicester. I mentioned Leicester very, very briefly just now. They obviously had a far better second half against Tottenham than they did first half. They end up getting a draw there. Possibly could have won it. If you look at Vardy's late chance in that game, they will now travel to a Fulham side who, I think it's been an up and down summer. You get exciting signings in the likes of Smith Rowe. I think a Sander Berge coming in helps them add some physicality to that midfield. but I'm still questioning if they have enough firepower up front. And we saw that against Man United, that when it came to putting the ball in the back of the net, they struggled a little bit.
Yeah, I think they just want to put the performance right against United, because I think they will be kicking themselves that they didn't go to Old Trafford on the opening day and get a really positive result, because I think the chances were there for them to do that. They could have at least got a draw, in my opinion. So, and as you say, Leicester sort of grew into the game yesterday, had that sort of confidence from when Vardy scored, sort of a few minutes into the second half, that they can compete again in the Premier League. So it's going to be a really interesting matchup. But I think Fulham wanting to put the result right from the United game will just edge it, and that sort of extra Premier League experience for me, I think Fulham will win that game 2-1.
2-1 to Fulham there. I think I don't know if you feel the same way. I don't know how much of this game is going to be played in midfield. I'm expecting the midfields for both teams to get bypassed quite quickly and send the ball forward to the attacking players, to the wide players, and that could make for a really exciting basketball game type end-to-end game.
Yeah, and I think what Leicester have to do as well, obviously they've got Facundo Buonanotte from Brighton on loan, and he was played centrally, which is something that we've been saying is his best position. So if they can get him linking up with Vardy and linking up with the two holding midfielders, or holding midfielder that they play with, I think he could make things tick for them. So it's about sort of getting that balance of chance creation and, as you say, winning those midfield battles to edge that game, because I think it will be an edgy game. So that's why I'm going 2-1 Fulham. I think they'll just edge Leicester out.
Yeah, and if they could add runners supporting him as well, because especially in that first half against Tottenham, there were a couple of times where he gets the ball, he's driving forward, and he just gets suffocated by 3 or 4 Tottenham players that press him, and he doesn't really have an out ball. So if they know they've got a player like that that's willing to drive with the ball, draw players to him, with how dangerous he can be, if they can have runners off him, maybe some of the wide players looking to get into spaces, it could make for an exciting attacking team there they would have at Leicester. In terms of, for me, obviously, I went 2-1 in the first game, 1-1 in this one. I don't know if I'm just feeling draws. I'm going to go 2-2. I'm not super confident in either of these teams defensively this season. I think Leicester City need to do a lot more defensively if they are to stay in the Premier League. We obviously know there's the points deduction that's hanging over their head, but I'm not super convinced, despite obviously Tottenham not going on and scoring off beyond that one goal that they did score. I just thought they got a lot of chances and probably should have scored more. It's just Tottenham. It was more a Tottenham issue than a Leicester defending well, in my opinion. And I think they need to tighten the screws a bit there. For me, let's move on to the next game. Man City versus Ipswich. Now, Joe, I don't know if you know, but for me, obviously, personally, I'm a Liverpool fan, but I've been singing pretty loudly with my chest out for Ipswich this season in terms of a team that I'm hoping that a tad predictable the podcast will be rooting for this season. We do pick a team each season that the podcast is going to be rooting for. It's a democratic vote, but obviously I'm leaning heavily towards Ipswich. I think they do things the right way off the pitch. I guess there's similar affections to a Brighton in that they appreciate a data approach. They understand how much you can improve things by improving a training ground, improving the stadium and the pitch that you're playing on, identifying some of the maybe smaller details that other people don't pay attention to that will add up to improving a team. If it is, as I said, a training ground, laying a pitch that's better, if it is moving everyone to the same training center instead of having the under 21s training somewhere else, those type of things I do love about them. And then obviously on the pitch, last season in the Championship, they played a good brand of football. Yes, ball possessive, but a lot more direct than maybe a Burnley that we saw last season. They have the daunting task, having already played Liverpool, of having to go and play Man City at Man City. Arguably the toughest game that you can play in the Premier League, probably is, in my opinion, the toughest game is Man City at the Etihad. Do you give Ipswich that fairy tale dream in this game, or how do you see it go?
Unfortunately, probably not. But the positive spin that I'll put on it for the Ipswich fans is at least you're getting it out of the way early. I don't think you would want to be sort of making that trip when you're in a relegation battle. And I hope they're not in a relegation battle. And I hope they stay up because they are a good club. They played some really good football last season, and I was rooting for them to get promoted. I am also a massive Ed Sheeran fan, so I'm very happy for him that he's obviously now part owner of the club and that their club sponsor. I love their football shirts. I'm a massive football shirt collector, and their shirts are definitely ones I'm looking at to add to my collection very soon. So Ipswich are a club that I am going to stand back and admire this season and hope that they do well. So I'm with the podcast on this one. I really hope they do stay up. So having said that, I do think it's going to be a very tough ask to go to the Etihad this early in the season. I do think Man City will hit them for 4 or 5. However, there is the opportunity that they do go there and they do defend well and they get a lucky 1-1 draw or something along those lines. But I think that's a little bit of a stretch at this point. So, yeah, unfortunately, I think I'm going to go for a Man City 4-0 win. Sorry, Ipswich fans.
4-0 win. Look, at least you buttered them up. At least you buttered them up before you gave them that True. 4-0. Look, it's Man City. We know what they are. And I think the important thing for Ipswich in this game, as you and I have affectionately mentioned that we're rooting for them this season, is not to get disheartened by what could potentially be a scoreline like you've suggested, a 4-0 loss. Because as you say, it's one, it's early in the season. 2, it's Manchester City. They do beat teams at high scores with regularity. They are the 4 times champions for a reason. They've reset the standard in the Premier League in terms of points tallies. You have to get to 90 points just to enter the conversation for a title race. It's insane the levels that they've reached. And my worry for Ipswich in this game is the speed and precision of the Man City players. I don't think Ipswich would have faced anything like this. Obviously, they had a taste of it in the second half against Liverpool when, and obviously we'll get to Liverpool later on in the podcast, but it was Liverpool with a new manager trying to implement a new style. This is going to be a Pep Guardiola team with a lot of Pep Guardiola players that have been playing this style of football for years and years and years. And it's just going to be a different speed of game that Ipswich are used to. Hopefully, they're able to showcase some of what has made a lot of people fall in love with them. Hopefully they can challenge City, and obviously from my perspective as a Liverpool fan, I'm hoping that they cause an upset. But I just think I just think City are going to be too strong for them. And as I said, as you said perfectly, it's still early in the season. You can still make up points. This is not a game you would have been expecting to get any points from. It's just to go represent yourselves as well as you can and see what happens. But yeah, I've gone 3-0 to City. I do think maybe they control the game a bit more if they go two goals up, or maybe even the third one, and don't necessarily drive the hammer home to try and go get the fourth or the fifth or the sixth. So yeah, I've gone 3-0 there. Southampton versus Nottingham Forest. Obviously, you can't come into the Premier League from a Southampton perspective, go away from home to a tough team. It ends up being playing 10 men. And then you don't come away with anything. I think that was really, really disappointing for them. Obviously, it's compounded by the fact that it was a mistake that led to them losing, the point. and then potentially losing all of the other points that they could have gotten. We'll see whether or not that affects them later on in the season and how much it affects them, the fact that they weren't able to capitalize on this. And then for Nottingham Forest, obviously, for their game, they had the draw, but I think the bigger thing for them was the Danilo injury.
Yeah. I think it's going to be a massive mental blow for Southampton. I mean, I'm sort of sat on two sides of this one. One part of me saying, yeah, it's going to be a big mental blow. The other side of me is saying it is Newcastle and they are a very, very good side. So if I was a Southampton fan, I wouldn't be overly worried. However, saying that again, I do think that they will struggle this season. I don't think they're a side that can go to teams and play a brand of football that they want to play. I think they'll be playing on the back foot a lot this season. And in my opinion, if Leicester don't get that points deduction, I think it could be Southampton that are rock bottom of the Premier League table at the end of it. And yeah, I don't know. I don't think Russell Martin convinces me wholly as a manager. Obviously, that it was a very sort of tight game at Wembley when they got promoted, so that was even on the knife edge whether they would even be a Premier League club this summer. But they are here to compete, and obviously Southampton fans will be begging that I'm proved wrong, but I don't see it at the moment. Whereas Forest, I think they're another team that I think could struggle this season if they have a couple of injuries to key players, like you mentioned, Danilo. That is a psychological blow, and I know how much injuries are a psychological blow, because at the end of last season, Brighton got hit with just insane amounts of injuries, and we dropped into the bottom half of the table. And I know that isn't an overly bad thing that we finished 11th, but from what we were competing for to how we fell was a little bit disappointing. So I think Nottingham Forest have to be careful. I think they could fall into a relegation battle again, and I'm not 100% sure if they'll stay up. But so this is a team between teams that want to get the points off the teams around them at the end of the season. So I on a knife edge, I think I'll probably say Nottingham Forest edge it, and I'll go 1-0 Forest.
Oh, that would be good for Nottingham Forest. As you mentioned, if they can separate themselves from some of the teams that may potentially be lower on the table, that would be good for them. I've gone a 1-1 draw. I watched Southampton's last preseason game with a bit of shock, because I don't know if you've seen their pitch, and look, they've had 2 weeks to fix it, but I don't know if it was intentional or not, but it doesn't look like it's, a pitch that we would be expecting from a team that likes to play with the ball from the back. And they almost conceded because of, how bubbly it was when they were trying to play out the back, and the keeper then miskicks it, and it ends up going to one of the forward players of the opposition team. If they're going to continue playing out the back with the pitch as it was heading into the season, I think that could cause them a lot of trouble. It could obviously cause other teams trouble as well, but and maybe they think it levels the playing field. But I would assume that a team that does intentionally want to play out of the back, as they seem to want to do, surely they would address their pitch before the season, and as I said, they've had 2 weeks. I'm not a groundsman, so I don't know if 2 weeks is enough. And we'll see this weekend whether it was enough. For Nottingham Forest, I think the big thing for me, obviously, I mentioned the Danilo injury, which I think was massive, because I was expecting him to have a big showcase season this year, especially with how well Sangara seems to have started this season, sort of joining him. But I think the issue for me is the inconsistency with Nottingham Forest. They seem like players that run hot and cold throughout the course of the season, and I just think they're going to get frustrated in this game against Southampton. Maybe not as clinical as they would be wanting to be, and that ends up resulting in a 1-1 draw. I do want to mention this podcast is presented by EPLindex.com in association with Liberty Shield. Liberty Shield is a VPN provider. You guys can check out their services at libertyshield.com. If you use the coupon code EPL25, you will get 25% off of the router or the software VPN. We're going to take a very short break, and we'll be right back with a Brighton State of the Nation address from Joe.
This week on the Triple Option, we were joined by Nick Saban.
The biggest change was when they changed the recruiting calendar to allow spring and summer visits. Those were almost sacred times when we had spring recruiting, but when spring recruiting was over, you had a lot of time to spend with your team, especially, throughout the summer. That's all kind of disappeared.
Watch Triple Option on YouTube or listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, we are back. Joe, we're speaking Brighton. We're speaking State of a Nation address. I'm going to leave that in your capable hands of how you want to take it. We were talking before the podcast on the busy summer that Brighton have had. Obviously, it includes a manager change in there as well. So yeah, I'll let you run with it, and maybe I'll chime in with my thoughts towards the end.
Yeah, no worries. So whenever I talk about my club, I like to take people all the way back to 1997, where Brighton were 1 point and 1 goal away from not existing as a football club anymore. And the fact remains that we are still a Premier League club. We're going into our 8th Premier League season on the back of a season where we competed in Europe for the first time. And for me, it still blows my mind like you would not believe that we are in the Premier League. We are competing with Man City and Arsenal and people like that. And it's just, we're so very lucky to have this football club still. And I hear it from fans of old, fans of, that fought for this football club, that went to the Fans United protests, that literally stood in front of government and pleaded for us to have a permanent home again. And we have it, and we are so proud of the way we're run now. We recorded a £125 million profit, which is a record for any Premier League club across the history of top flight football in this country. So we are so proud. And the thing for me was, okay, we've made all these big player sales. What can we do with that money now? And I think Tony Bloom has forecast it in a way where we are going into a transfer window as probably the most healthy club that you could possibly get. And we're making shrewd signings still. Yes, we're spending big transfer fees, £40 million on Rutter, £30 million on Bruder, and stuff like that. But they're signings that still have promise, could still go for a lot more money in the future. And we're not spending big wages. So we're doing it in a sustainable way. I think the frustrating thing for me has always been that people compare us to Southampton and compare us to Leicester. And whilst we haven't done what Leicester have done, we've come nowhere near what they achieved. I think we're building this club in a much more sustainable way that we can continue to challenge for top 6 and continue to challenge for Europe. I think it would take a massive, huge financial drop-off for Brighton to ever struggle again. And I think that's one thing we're so proud of our owners for, is that they're putting us in a position. And Paul Barber, our CEO, was quoted at the end of last season at Fans Forum. He said, "You've been at the brink. Your club has almost never existed. We will never put you in that position ever again." So everything's rosy at Brighton. Of course it is. We've just won 3-0 in our first game week. We've just played in Europe for the first time. We said goodbye to Roberto De Zerbi, who was, one of our most influential managers of the modern day at our football club. And we've moved on to a guy who, at the moment, seems to want to improve what Roberto De Zerbi was doing, which is it's mind-blowing. So the state of play at Brighton is that it's very positive, and we're looking to challenge for European football. We're looking to challenge for Champions League football in the next 3 to 4 years, and there is no ceiling at this football club. and that's what our owner has been quoted to say again. So yeah, I think Brighton fans are rightly gushing about the club at the moment, and I don't think many people must. Obviously, Crystal Palace fans listening right now will be like wanting to switch off, hearing how well run we are and all the signings we're making, and I think it's a huge thing for this club to be on that pedestal, to be the club that everybody wants to be. I just really, really hope that we continue that way, and I think we will continue that way. Will there be seasons where we finish 14th, 13th? Yes, probably. But we have to remember that we're competing in the best league in the world. So long as we're a Premier League club, we will always be competing. So I think that's the real positive thing that Brighton fans know, is that no matter what, if we're in the Premier League and we finish 17th, we could challenge the next season.
Yeah, look, I'm enjoying Brighton summer, or enjoyed Brighton summer. Obviously, the transfer window is not over yet. I think Brighton, for me, has been a club that I've been impressed with in recent years because of, in my opinion, they embraced an approach that I had seen elements of at Liverpool. Not to say that Liverpool did it before them or anything like that, just that I've seen it with a club that I follow, day in and day out. And I've seen elements of that at Brighton as well, which was embracing the, data side of things, embracing looking at the small margins and trying to make up, the difference that way, to say, okay, we're not going to go and sign, the player on the poster card. We're going to go and look at the underlying data and say, okay, can we get a player that's doing the same thing that maybe some people might not know about? And go and get that player. But in doing that, you then have to have a manager that's a coach, a player coach, a player developer that's good at bringing out that raw talent from players. And I think Brighton have been so good at that. The managers that Brighton have hired throughout the different phases as they've been coming up the leagues have been perfect, in my opinion. And every time Brighton lose a manager, you think, oh, okay, maybe this could be them being in trouble this time around. And then they go and find another one, and they go and find another one. And as I said, it's not always the most conventional choice in terms of, what pundits would do or something like that. But then when you take a step back, when you look at it, when you actually assess it, you say that makes all the sense in the world. The style of football is intentional. I think all of the managers have elements of that, confident in possession. We've seen with De Zerbi sort of that lulling teams into sleep almost with that the tempo changes. I think we'll see similar things from the new manager coming in terms of sort of that tempo change. And I hope for Brighton's sake that it is a strong season for Fabian. I think obviously coming to the Premier League, there's always that question of, okay, how are they going to handle how tough a league it is, the fact that every single game is important and you can't rest on your laurels. Well, I would say he's going to handle it well, because for him, he's coming from a team where every game was important. He needed to be that good in order for him to get the results that he wanted. He wasn't coming from, a team that was, the favorite or held in high esteem, or, it's St. Pauli. And I don't want to say that in a diminishing way. I want to say that he appreciates that every game matters. And I think he'll bring that approach to Brighton. And I think that will only help Brighton going forward. But yeah, for me, I'm happy to see how Brighton are performing. I think it's well deserved. I think also, surprising in terms of how big they've gone this summer. But again, as with Brighton, as it always is, when you take a step back and you look and you look at all of the players that Brighton have sold in recent years when they haven't gone big in the transfer window. So they've done it, as you've said, the right way, methodical way, in a progressive way, obviously not, trying to, fast forward things. I think they've built up enough financial financial muscle over the last couple of seasons where they have brought in, players from abroad and English players as well, players in their academy, sold those players off, not always gone and, replenished, with the same caliber of player. They've gone and gotten, even younger players at times and built it up again and again and again, which then allows you to have a summer like this where you do identify, 3, 4, 5 players that you say, okay, these are the ones that are going to move us into a new tier within the Premier League. And I think that's what Brighton are trying to do this season. I think they're attacking the season because they want to enter that new tier. And if they can do that, I think it's going to be excitement continuing for you as Brighton fans.
Yeah, and I think we are incredibly excited. From what we've heard of from Fabian Hertzler already, he seems to be the guy that wants to challenge. He quoted, challenge the establishment. And, as you say, he is coming from a league where every game mattered. And, they had to be top of their game to get promoted to the Bundesliga, from a really tough league. So I think we're not going to just sort of go off of what we've done in the past. We are turning a leaf into a new chapter under Fabian Hertzler, and we are going to be a new Brighton. We're not going to play the same way. We're not going to, take inspiration from managers that have been here. We're going to play Fabian Hertzler's way, and we're going to, continue to light up the Premier League, I hope, and show why the business model of Brighton is the best way to go. Because, as I say, we're building sustainably. We're building in a way that we hope to be a fully established Premier League club, and to be one of those teams that is the ever present. And why can't we be? A lot of pundits a lot of fan channels have sort of spoken of Brighton's insignificance, but I think Brighton is becoming significant. Brighton is becoming the example. Every club wants to be like us. Look at how much Chelsea wants to copy us. It's just absolutely unbelievable that we are the club that everyone's looking at and saying, yeah, do you know what? That's the club we want to be.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly there. And I say this as a Liverpool fan who a couple of seasons ago, I thought we were the club that everyone wanted to be. I thought we were the smartest people in the room. This was in the first iteration of the Klopp and Michael Edwards era. And then obviously, I think Klopp got way too much power and Edwards eventually left. And we were no longer the smartest club or people in the room. And when I looked around the league, to me, it became Brighton. Brighton were now the smartest club in the league. They were the smartest people in the room, making the smart decisions. And as you've said, clubs wanting to be like you, well, we can see it because they keep trying to take your managers, they keep trying to take your backroom staff, like they keep trying to take your players. So obviously, you guys are doing something right. Yeah. If so many teams are trying to,
there's one man.
There's one man they can't take.
There's one. Yeah, there's one man they can't take. There is one man that they can't replicate, and that is Tony Bloom.
Yeah,
he's the man with all the data. He's the man that's driving this club in the best way possible. Of course, he's got amazing people around him, but he can replace them. He's got the Star Lizard data. So that's why we're in the driving seat, because I think we're 5-6 years ahead of everybody else. And that's down to Tony Bloom and only him.
And what a favourable position to be in. Now let's move on to two clubs that are probably hoping that they do get closer to what Brighton are doing off the pitch. We've seen, frustrations for Tottenham in terms of on the pitch and off the pitch. We've seen frustrations for Everton on the pitch and off the pitch. I mean, these are two clubs who, as I've mentioned, probably want to be maybe a bit more like Brighton in terms of how they operate things. But for Tottenham, you looked at the beginning of the season. We know that their first two fixtures, you have Leicester away, you have Everton at home. You're thinking, okay, can we pick up as many points as we can in these games? Because looking later on in the fixture list, we're then going to have, a game against Newcastle. We're then going to have a game against Arsenal. Like, does it compound things And does this make it I mean, it was a must-win before, but even more significant must-win for Tottenham in a game like this, where they would have hoped to start with 6 points to sort of have that buffer heading into games against Newcastle and Arsenal. And then from an Everton perspective, I mentioned the fact it's the last season at Goodison Park. Maybe the pressure of playing at home might build the longer that they don't get a result there. Time will tell. But coming up against a vulnerable Tottenham side, I'm worried for Everton that it's going to be more a wounded animal Tottenham that's going to come and be aggressive and try and put them to bed versus maybe a Tottenham side that will be unsure of themselves after the performance they had last Monday.
I think Tottenham, that they want to put the result against Leicester right. That, Ange Postecoglou came out and said how wasteful they were in front of goal. And I would expect a reaction. You mentioned obviously having those 2 games at the start of the season and wanting to pick up as many points as possible. Look at how Tottenham started last season. People were talking about them as title contenders, and that eventually turned out to be extremely wrong, and Tottenham did a Tottenham. But I think that's what you expect from them. Obviously, they got Dom Solanke, who wants to get off the mark for Spurs and get his first goal. So I think there are promising things for Tottenham to look at going into a game against Everton. But being the team that just played Everton, I think there's definitely moments where they could have scored, and they did have some really good moments, and they got into the box. They won a penalty, which was eventually overturned, but they're getting into the right positions and they are competing. So I think it's going to be a tricky one for Tottenham. But I think they at home, I think they'll just edge it. I think we'll probably go 3-2 to Tottenham. I think there will be goals.
That would make for an exciting game, obviously. From my perspective, I think Tottenham's issue is I've not yet seen a complete 90 minutes from them under Big Ange. I think they play games in phases. 10 minutes of real intense football, and then the next 10 minutes it's at like 50%, and then they go again in a couple of minutes, and it's like riding a wave with them in terms of the intensity and the speed with which they play and the intention with which they play. And if it's all well and good playing in that style and that way of football, but if you're going to do that, you have to make sure that when you do go on those highs, when you do start speeding up the tempo and trying to be aggressive, that you create a degree of separation for the times when you do dip, that, you've created enough of a gap that the other team can't claw themselves back into the game. So we've seen countless times where Tottenham score the first goal, they go aggressive as soon as they score a goal. And if they don't score that second one, you're almost just waiting for the other team to eventually, come in. So that, I think that's the worry for them, whether or not they're going to be able to sustain it, whether they're going to be able to create a degree of separation. I'm going to be with Tottenham in this one. I know you've predicted a 3-2 there. I'm going to go 2-0 to Tottenham in this one. I think they're going to have enough. I think their fans are going to be expecting a response. I think Big Ange is going to be expecting a response. And I think the players will want to deliver a far better performance than what we saw in that second half against Leicester City. Our next game, Joe, is Aston Villa versus Arsenal, arguably the fixture of the weekend. We know Aston Villa, they saw a winner from a player who, I guess by all accounts, was meant to be leaving the club. He had an interesting celebration where he was obviously almost apologizing to the fans and, making a statement that, no, actually, I'm here to stay. I'm speaking about Duran, obviously. How do you see this game going? I mean, we saw Man City, Chelsea. We saw, I guess, the disparity in maybe team chemistry between those two teams in what is perhaps the big game of last weekend. This one, it's an Aston Villa side that is trying to maintain their position in the top 4 against an Arsenal side who is trying to do one better and get over the hump. A lot of people are actually predicting that Arsenal finally go and win the title in however long since they won it. How do you see this game going? How are you seeing Arsenal's chances of winning the title, and also I guess Aston Villa being able to juggle Champions League football and Premier League and all the cups that come around as well?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that in terms of balancing the league and Europe, I think Aston Villa have done that and done that well last season, with arguably a tougher schedule, playing on a Thursday and then having to play at the weekend as well, and still getting Champions League football. So I think if they can carry on in the way that they were playing last season and reacting to their European fixtures and going into the Premier League and carrying their form through both competitions, I think they'll do quite well. Obviously for Arsenal, this one is probably a lot for the mental side of it in terms of can they go on and win that league. Obviously it was Aston Villa that slightly derailed them at the end of last season, and meant that it was sort of a tough task to try and keep up with Man City and win that title. Well, obviously it did go down to the final day, but had they have got that win against Aston Villa, I think it would have been a lot tighter. So for Arsenal, it's about beating a team that seemed to have their number at the end of last season. Both fixtures last season were two really good games. So yeah, it's one of those things where I think Arsenal might just slightly edge it, and I think I do agree with a lot of people that it could be Arsenal's year this season. They haven't really fallen away over the last two seasons, and they have been challenging Man City right to the very end. So for me, I think Arsenal just do this one. I think they'll win 1-0, but I think it will be a tough game.
Yeah, I'm also anticipating a tough game. I think Arsenal would be thoroughly pleased with that, and it would probably re-emphasize that great defense that Arsenal had last season. I'm on board with that adage saying of offense wins games, but defense wins championships. And if Arsenal can maintain, that very stingy defense that they had last season and perhaps even improve on it. We know Timber has come back this season. They've got Fiore who's come in as well. So they're strengthening that area of the pitch as well. So it'll be interesting to see if it does improve. I think it can go two ways for Arsenal. Either you get disheartened by the fact that you've gone close on two occasions, and the efforts that you had put in to get as close as you can, and you start doubting whether or not you can go beyond that, or you use it as motivation to say, we're that much closer, we're improving the squad. Our core players are aging at a good age together. In my opinion, if you look at the likes of the Sakas, the Rices, the Odegaards, they're all either in their peaks or entering their peaks, or very, very good age profile for Arsenal, in my opinion. And I think that helps them in terms of, even if they don't improve, the squad itself, because their players are entering their peak or are in their peak years, they are improving themselves. And I think we'll see better versions of a Saka, of an Odegaard, of a Declan Rice, where he's got another year in that system. So yeah, if there is a season for Arsenal to go and do it, I think this one is shaping up quite well for them. But as we all know, Man City just always seem to do just enough. I don't say that disparagingly, but I mean in the sense of, whether they're getting 90 points or they're getting 99 points, they always just know how to do enough at the end of the season to get over the line. It's very, very impressive from that perspective. But for this specific game, I think Aston Villa will be right up for it. I think Unai Emery, it's probably an Unai Emery derby, this one. He will be right up for it. I think it's a revenge game for him. He's going to have his team really up for it. Look, we obviously are waiting for, Ollie Watkins to come in and lead the line and continue the good form that he had last season for Aston Villa. And as we said, the likes of Duran and Rodgers who's come in, they've been deputizing quite well. from a tactical perspective, I think that high line for Aston Villa always seems to scare me. And with Arsenal's pace and especially pace out wide, I can see the likes of Martinelli having a good game, even though he's an inconsistent player. I'm going to go 2-1 Arsenal. I think Arsenal will have just enough to get the win on this one. And as I'm saying, I think it shapes up for a really interesting season, because we know that Man City are facing Ipswich. On paper, Man City should be beating an Ipswich at home comfortably. And if they win that game, obviously Arsenal will play after them. So Arsenal will know what they need to do to match City. And they're going to have to match City, if not go ahead of City early in the season. In my opinion, the way to win against City is the way Liverpool did it, which is by February, March, City have to be out of the league title race. And they're now focusing on Champions League and other trophies, because we've seen season after season, if they've got a sniff of a chance to go and win the title, they'll just go and win every game, to end off a season. So you have to blow them out the water. So it's important for Arsenal to start really well, get a big win here. I don't know if you feel that that's the same approach that they should take.
Yeah, I mean, you're so right. Man City are ruthless. They really are. When, as you say, when they've got a sniff of a title, when they smell blood, they go for the kill. And that is just Pep Guardiola in a nutshell. And so, yeah, you're 100% right. Arsenal need to step on the gas really early and keep going and hopefully, Man City pick up a few disappointing results along the way. I say disappointing results. I probably mean a few draws. I don't see the Man City losing many, but it's the slim margins, isn't it? It's Man City getting a draw one weekend and Arsenal winning, and then there's 2 points ahead. I know Arsenal were ahead a little bit a few seasons ago, or even last season. I can't remember which. And Man City obviously made up the ground. So even then, even still, if Arsenal do get ahead, if you've got Man City sniffing down your neck, it's a very, very, very hard task to sort of keep them away. So I think Arsenal just got to hope for a Man City stinker. Or if Man City get charged, obviously with the 115 charges that are looming over them, and they get a massive points deduction. But that being said, I think Arsenal do have the quality to mount another title charge. It's just, can they get there ahead of City?
Yeah, it's tough. It's really tough to get one over City. But as you said, obviously the charges are a cloud over their heads. I'm assuming it's probably going to be a long drawn out hearing, considering how long it's taken for them just to get to this point. I wouldn't be surprised if we're looking at maybe next year. But as you say, if that sort of takes it out of Man City's hands and they do get penalized this season, then maybe I do definitely think Arsenal are the best positioned club to go and capitalize on that, not just this season, but for a couple of seasons yet, if other teams don't course correct. Let's move on to Bournemouth versus Newcastle. We mentioned obviously Bournemouth a bit earlier when we were talking about the draw with Nottingham Forest. I think for Bournemouth, the big question, and everyone was curious to see how they were going to handle things without Solanke. I definitely think it's obvious that there is that gaping hole for them. I think whether or not they go and make a big splashy move in terms of trying to replace him, I guess time will tell with the window still to close. I did find it interesting that they were trying to get Mamardashvili from Valencia on loan, who's a goalkeeper that Liverpool are looking to sign, or when this podcast is released, they may well have signed already. The idea was for Liverpool to agree, a deal for him and him to go on loan to Bournemouth for a year. He's turned down that move to Bournemouth. He wants to stay at Valencia for the year, and it's sort of Liverpool future-proofing themselves for potentially an Alisson replacement down the line. But interesting that obviously Bournemouth felt they needed to improve in that department, the goalkeeping department, when many would have thought it was, on the opposite end of the pitch that they would have been investing heavily in. For Newcastle, spirited win. It felt like they had their backs against the wall when they had that red card. What did you make of the red card? Because in my opinion, yes, you can argue it's harsh, but don't give these officials a chance to give you a red card. Like, whether or not it's harsh, why are you putting your head anywhere near there? I thought he got baited, he fell for it, and it was just silly from Shaw.
Yeah, and I think you sort of half see him thinking about it as he's doing that action.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not a full-on headbutt. He doesn't really do it with much force. But again, as you say, you're giving the opportunity for VAR and the referee to look at that and say, yeah, no, that is not right. And it isn't right. You shouldn't be putting your face in someone else's face. And it's not a very good example to set at all. I think in terms of their performance as well, I mean, I know they played quite a lot of the game with only 10 men, but I think to only beat Southampton 1-0 and for it to have been a mistake, yeah, it's good that they kept a clean sheet with 10 men. They'll take a lot of confidence from that. But I'm not overly convinced that Newcastle can go on to have a really good season as their fans would hope, as they've made a lot of good signings over the last couple of years. I'm not sure if they're stalling at the moment a little bit. Obviously, Eddie Howe will want to get a number on his old team. And I think Newcastle will run out winners in this game, but I think it'll be a tough one. Bournemouth, as you say, have added Evan Nilsson up front, and whether he can be a good Solanke replacement remains to be seen, but I personally think he's a good signing. And I think Bournemouth are waiting to make that sort of jump between mid-table mediocrity and challenging for the top half again. And I think they could do that if they add well. I think they have added well over the last couple of seasons. And their manager has got them playing some decent football and getting some decent results. So I think Newcastle will just edge this one. I think I'll go for a 2-1 win to Newcastle.
2-1 to Newcastle on that one. And as you say, obviously, Evan Nilsson, he looked good at times at Porto. I know, in the past, he's been one of those players that has been targeted by Premier League clubs, but eventually ends up at Bournemouth. And I guess for their sake, as you say, hopefully he ends up being able to deputise and maybe go one better than what Solanke did. But Solanke had a very impressive season, which obviously allowed him to move on. I think from a Newcastle perspective, in terms of the stalling and the stuttering, I think it's always good when you overachieve. Yes, in terms of, I don't think everyone or many expected them to make top 4 the season they did. I thought maybe European football in some shape or form, and then they build on that, and then they get into the Champions League the season after, and maybe a slower climb up the table probably in the long term would have benefited them, because I thought they were way too stretched last season with Champions League, having to deal with Champions League and the Premier League. I thought Eddie Howe didn't really know how to manage the squad in that sense, which is, again, where you do get the benefit of an Unai Emery who lives and breathes European football. He managed the Aston Villa side a lot better than what Eddie Howe did with Newcastle. We saw the likes of Trippier by November, December, they were done. In terms of, fatigue and tiredness. But I think the Newcastle owners have shown that they've been ruthless. Obviously, Amanda Stagley, she got removed from her role at Newcastle. Perhaps that had to do with some of the PSR issues that they faced, heading into this season. And if Eddie Howe doesn't deliver top 4 this season, I do wonder if he's one of those managers that does end up on a hot seat. I think long term, from the outside looking in, there's always been pressure on whether Eddie Howe can be, a top 4 manager or lead Newcastle to the title. Is he just a bridging manager? Whereas I've found from a lot of Newcastle fans or from within Newcastle, they are very confident that Eddie Howe is the man that can deliver things for them. And there's not as much pressure for him to go from fans as I see from pundits or fans of other teams, which I find quite interesting. In terms of this game, I think this is low key a game that's going to be really fun to watch. We know Bournemouth are playing really nice football under Andoni, and they seem to make games really exciting all the way through the game. Bournemouth are never really out of a game, and we saw that last season. We've seen that this season as well. I'm going to go with a 2-1 win to Newcastle. So I'm going to reverse your scoreline. I'm going to mirror you there, and I'm going to go Newcastle edging that one 2-1. Obviously, they head into that run of fixtures as well, where they've got the Spurs coming up, and then are looking to climb up the table, at least give themselves a buffer of the 2 games before they play them. And, hopefully, I guess for their sake, they can do that. Let's move on to our next game. It's Wolverhampton versus Chelsea, 2 clubs that lost on the opening day of the season. I think for Wolves, they eventually ended up being comfortably beat by Arsenal, and we've mentioned how strong Arsenal are this season. Questions on, obviously, it's really, really early on, and it's not a criticism. It's just a note. In terms of Larson, he had that chance, the new striker they brought in this summer. He had that chance. We saw the brilliant save from Raya. How quickly do you think fans maybe not turn on players, but how short a leash do players get, where we've seen it with Darwin Núñez, for example, where early on he was getting a lot of chances and he was getting praise for getting into a lot of goal scoring opportunities and situations. And then eventually it moved to, okay, now this guy's just wasting way too many big chances. Do you find there is that niche for players, or is a player dependent, whether or not, like a Darwin Núñez, for example, Liverpool fans are constantly singing his song a lot more than some of the other players, and yet he doesn't produce, in my opinion, at the level that warrants that amount of adulation.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, because especially if you're Wolverhampton Wanderers, you maybe give a little bit more leeway, because, and I don't want to disrespect Wolves at all here, because they've achieved some great things, and they've had some great players and do play well under O'Neill. I think if you're a Wolves fan, you probably give a little bit more leeway, and you give a little bit more time for these new players to come into your side and to really make an impact. And I think Wolves fans are patient enough for that. It's a really difficult one, because I think it just depends on the situation, doesn't it? If you're Liverpool, you expect big things. You expect your players to come in and to make a really big impact and to be ruthless and take the chances and win you games. But if you're Wolves, you probably give that little bit more time. And I think that's the best thing to do with players that come in and they don't settle that well, is that you do give them time and you support them, because they're your player. They pull on your shirt, they're giving 100%, and if you can see they're giving 100%, that's all you can ask for. You see them lacking effort, absolutely criticise. But if they're getting their chances, if it's just a case of wait and see, I think fans need to do that. So I wouldn't be too worried if I was a Wolves fan watching that.
Yeah, definitely something to keep an eye on. As I said, it's the first game, so I'm not putting it on him to say, look, he needs to turn things around quickly. You have to give players a chance to settle in and get acclimatized to the Premier League. But I do think it's always interesting to see, where that line in the sand is in terms of, how you interpret that. But for Wolves, they're coming up against a Chelsea side who I think were comfortably beat by Man City. I always thought Man City had them at arm's length throughout the game. Yes, City had their moment. Chelsea had their moments within the game, but I do think City could have gone up another gear if needed, but they end up winning that one. Look, in terms of squad size, I think Chelsea are arguably the one side that can match City in terms of depth. But now it's just about getting the chemistry, getting onto the training pitch, getting, that consistency going, figuring out what starting 11 you have, let alone what matchday squad you're going to pick. We obviously saw the controversy with the Raheem Sterling statement from his representatives. How is Maresca meant to manage, such a big squad and what challenges does he face coming into a game away from home against the Wolves side who also lost? But for Chelsea, they have to start winning now. Like, I don't think, we've spoken about the striker, whether or not, Jürgen Larsson has a short leash or a long leash. It seems when it comes to managers for Chelsea, it's short leash. You either deliver or you're out. So at some point in time, he has to start delivering wins for them. Maresca, that is.
Yeah. I think Maresca's made a big mistake. I think he should have stayed at Leicester. He should have continued that journey, just like McKenna did, for that little bit longer. I think Chelsea is a terrible job to take if you're a manager. Obviously, every manager that goes in there thinks that they are the one to change Chelsea's fortunes, thinks that they are the one to control this squad, to get the best out of it. But I genuinely don't believe there's a manager in the world that can make that team better. It's an absolute mess at that football club at the moment. And I'm not saying that as a Brighton fan. I think Chelsea fans would agree with me. You've got over 40 players who, if Raheem Sterling is releasing that statement, I have no doubt that there's other players that feel the same way. And you're expecting them to go out, and I know they had a good end to last season, but you're expecting them to go out and challenge again for another season and to keep that morale up and to really fight for each other. There's a lot of players to be fighting for each other. And I think you'll find a situation where they'll be fighting against each other, and there'll be, morale will go down, and, players won't know where they stand. Players will be left out, left, right, and centre, and it's just an absolute mess. And Bowley, the way he's trying to run that football club, the deals that he's making with players, 8-year deals, big wages, there's just a lack of motivation, I think, from the Chelsea end, and I really don't see them having a good season. And I know they only lost against Man City, and they won't take much of a mental hit from that. But in all honesty, I don't think Manchester City got out of first gear at all in that game. They took their chances when they had to take their chances, and that's what you expect from Man City. And Chelsea couldn't quite, get that. And I think if you've got a goalkeeper in Robert Sanchez, who was at Brighton and he did okay for us, but his mentality is so weak. And if you want to be a Chelsea goalkeeper, if you want to play for that football club, and I think their fans would agree, you have to have an elite mentality. And I don't see many players at that club with a Chelsea mentality. I don't see the likes of, the John Terrys, the Frank Lampards, the Didier Drogbas and stuff like that Chelsea fans grow to expect. And I think that's why it's just going to be a completely poisonous atmosphere until they can, one, get rid of their owner and move on to pastures new, or two, if they can possibly find that balance. But it's extremely hard at this stage. And obviously Wolves at home, they'll want to react from their loss against Arsenal. And I think there could be an upset, but I think I'm going to sit on the fence and go with a 2-2 draw.
Chelsea fans will not be happy with that. I think Wolves would take that if you offered them a 2-2 draw today. Look, yeah, you mentioned the managing of the big squad, and I agree with you. Sterling is not the only player that would be feeling like that. It's just happened that he's the first one to do it. I'm curious to see if others follow suit, or whether or not they vocalize it publicly. I'm certainly sure they're going to be vocalizing it privately within the club. And that is arguably the biggest task for Maresca to deal with, is how do you deal with all these egos? Because, as you say, all these players coming in, they're going to feel like they're, as you said, where or the managers coming in feel like they're the ones that can solve the problems. I think it's similar for the players. I mean, if you, personally, I don't understand why Dewsbury Hall would pick a Chelsea over Brighton, for example. I think he would have had more job security at a Brighton. We know Brighton went in for him a couple of times. You go to Chelsea, you're going to drown out. You're going to get drowned out in that midfield. They've already spent over 200 million on their midfield. You coming in and I guess we've seen Gallagher go. So maybe there is, thought to, following the manager that had you in the championship and maybe he'll pick you. But to me, it doesn't make sense. And at some point in time, all these players that have these big egos are going to get frustrated. I don't know if Maresca can handle them. We've seen Pep Guardiola knows how to handle them. It's sort of his way or the highway. If you don't like it, like a Cancelo, you're going to be out. I'm going to ship you out. But in order to do that, in order to have that gravitas, you have to be a proven winner, in my opinion. Pep Guardiola can tell a player, yeah, I'm not going to pick you this weekend. And players, not as many players will feel aggrieved. Whereas a Maresca, who hasn't really done anything in the game, all due respect to him, he's still young in his managerial career. And, the stints that he has had managing haven't been as successful maybe as he would have liked. If he comes to a Raheem Sterling and says, you're not playing this weekend, I think that conversation goes slightly different than if a Pep Guardiola is saying it. So yes, he learned under Pep, and yes, he's probably used to or been in an environment where there's a big squad, and he's probably looking to emulate that at Chelsea and say, we when I was at City, that's how we operated. But sorry, dude, you're not Pep Guardiola. I don't think you're going to be able to, to tell these players that they're not playing. I think it could become very toxic very, very quickly at Chelsea. And if he doesn't start winning, I think it's going to compound the situation and accelerate the difficulties that he's going to face. In terms of this game itself, I'm going to go with an ugly Chelsea 1-0 win. I think that Wolves are going to be very, very disciplined, and we've seen them under O'Neill put in some impressive performances. Obviously, it's the Pedro Neto revenge game. So we'll see whether or not he gets minutes. But I think the Wolves players will be motivated to try and keep Chelsea out and try and get something from this game. But I'm going to guess that Chelsea are just going to have too much firepower coming off of the bench, especially early in the season. I think, players coming off the bench is going to be a big factor, as, fit people are still getting up to full match fitness. I know all the players come back in really good fitness nowadays, but match fitness is something different and unique. I think 1-0 for Chelsea in this one. They just edge it. And maybe it's my sympathy towards Maresca that it eases the pain for him a bit there. But I just wanted to get your thoughts on Dewsbury Hall choosing Chelsea before we move on to our last fixture.
Yeah, I mean, if Chelsea come knocking with their big wages and their big contracts, I don't think many players would say no. We talk a lot about the finances in football, but when you really give the reality of it, they've got a short career, and they want to make as much money as possible to make them comfortable in the future. And of course, their main motivation is football. He will be going there hoping to play for Chelsea Football Club. Of course he will. But I think, as you say, if he really, really did think about the football side of things and wanted to further his career and play that longevity game, then yeah, maybe he should have come to Brighton. But I think any Brighton fan will tell you, if you don't want to come to this football club, if you don't want to play for this football club, and if you're that easily swayed, then we don't want you. So I think it's just one of those things that, yeah, he's chosen them. They hijacked the deal at the last minute. He was due to have a medical with us. And, good luck to him, but I don't think it's going to go well. Obviously, he's playing under his old manager from his days at Leicester, and they won the championship together. So, yeah, there's every chance that he could make an impact under there, but you've got so many players ahead of you. Enzo Fernandez, Moises Caicedo, Lavia, people like that. So It's going to be a really difficult thing for him to find his feet and find his way into that Chelsea side. So if I'm talking from a Brighton perspective, yeah, silly decision, but I think you can't begrudge a player for choosing that length of deal and those wages, really.
It's the financial security, isn't it? It's probably a hard thing to turn down. But yeah, maybe I'm selfishly, for my viewing pleasure, I enjoyed him when he was in the Premier League first time out with Leicester. He went down to the Championship. I thought he was the best player in the Championship last season by far. We could tell he wasn't a Championship level player. He was a Premier League level player. When he was then now, obviously, and he did the right thing. He did it the right way, right? They get relegated. He says, I'm going to stay. I'm going to help you guys get back up, and then I can leave with a clear conscience. I thought that was really admirable. So throughout that whole process, I'm really, liking the player, liking what he is about. And then I see the interest from Brighton. I think that would be a really exciting signing for them. I guess it's more personal disappointment because I was already envisioning him in a Brighton top and seeing what he could do there. But yeah, so maybe it's a me problem rather than a him problem. Let's move on to our last fixture. It's Liverpool versus Brentford. Liverpool finally get that home game, a home welcoming for Arne Slot. His name's already been sung at Anfield, though. We saw when Klopp was leaving, in his leaving speech, he started an Arne Slot chant there. What did you make of, I guess, maybe Klopp leaving, if you want to speak about that, and the appointment of Arne Slot? How do you think Liverpool fared with the system against Ipswich, and how do you think they handle a Brentford side who, to me, I thought were the surprise of the weekend? Looking into the season, heading into the season, we know obviously the Ivan Toney issues in terms of him pretty much having one foot out the door from the moment he got suspended, in my opinion. He's quite bold about talking about, moving on from Brentford. So I assumed he would have been out the door quite early on. But Brentford then have that vacuum. It seems like Mbeumo is willing to fill the vacuum because obviously the big striker they signed ends up getting injured, unfortunately for them. In recent seasons, I thought Brentford was starting to go backwards, but based on the performance, and look, it's one game, it's the first game of the season, I was impressed with their performance, and it's making me question, my thoughts about them and the overall picture. I thought they might be dragged into a relegation battle this season.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with Brentford. I think it was a game where they had to ride their luck a little bit. I think Crystal Palace did have the chances to win that game, and were lacking a little bit of sort of ruthlessness. And I think Brentford sort of stuck in there and obviously got their chance at the end and won the game, which I was obviously very happy about. So thank you very much, Brentford. So yeah, I think they will be fine this season. I think Mbeumo and Wissa and people like that can really step up to the plate, and they showed that last season. I know they struggled a little bit, but they did stay up comfortably in the end. And I think a lot of people maybe tipped them to go down. I thought they possibly could go down this season, but based on the fact that how resilient they are, and I love Thomas Frank as a manager. I think he's a top man, and a really top coach, and can coach games and outwit people. I think he outwitted De Zerbi a few times, and that's no mean feat at all. So yeah, I think Brentford could stay up and sort of have a mid-table sort of finish around 13th, 12th. If they can, win games like they did against Palace. As for Liverpool, obviously Jurgen Klopp leaving, I think, is a massive loss for the Premier League. I absolutely adore Jurgen Klopp. I think he's such a good man, an incredible manager, and someone that's always looking out for the welfare of his players and the people around him. So I hope he gets back into football very soon. And I hope he goes into a job where I can still appreciate him. I wouldn't like him to go to a club or a country that I'm not overly fond of.
So Crystal Palace is ruled out?
Definitely not Crystal Palace. Thanks very much. But I think with Arne Slot, I've watched a lot of his interviews. I watched obviously when he joined the club and Liverpool did the behind the scenes sort of video with him. He seems that likable character again, and a guy that did well with Feyenoord, and I think could do well with Liverpool as well. I think it'll take some time. I think Liverpool fans have to be patient again, like they were with Jurgen Klopp. And I think you could be onto another really good era. And I think it was probably quite a tough start for Arne Slot going to Ipswich, a team that maybe he didn't do or hadn't seen much of, obviously, with them playing in the Championship last season. And going there and controlling the game in parts and being ruthless when they had to be. I think some of the football Liverpool played was electric and really quick. And I think probably shocked Ipswich a little bit. And maybe gave Ipswich that reality check that they needed in the Premier League, that, the ball is going to move that fast and the players are that extra yard quicker. So I think Liverpool can draw a lot of confidence from the game against Ipswich and play against Brentford at home and make another statement win. I think it'll be 3-0 to Liverpool.
That's music to my ears, Joe. I think playing out the back, obviously they did elements of that under Jurgen Klopp. I think it's a bit more intentional with Arne Slot in terms of what Liverpool are trying to do and draw teams into a press so that they can play balls in behind for the likes of Mo Salah. For example, the first goal for Diogo Jota was textbook Arne Slot football, where Szoboszlai is basically playing with two false nines, if you can put it that way, Jota and Szoboszlai. They're occupying the centre backs. They drop deep to try and help with the build up. Obviously, the centre backs have a question to answer. Do I follow that player deep to mark him, or do I stay where I am? If I stay where I am, the ball would go into Szoboszlai. He turns and drives with the ball. If the defender does come with him, then it's a few quick passes and the ball in behind into that space that defender's left. Seems to be what Liverpool are trying to do under Slot. And we saw a couple of those goals in pre-season. We've seen it in the Premier League as well. And I wouldn't be surprised if they score a couple more of those heading into his tenure. I think at home, Liverpool will obviously be wanting to put in a good performance. I like the fact that he was very assertive at halftime. He made a halftime change when it needed to be made. Obviously, you feel sorry for Kwanzaa. He's a young player, but at least it's a manager in his first game that's brave enough to do something like that. I think is going to bode well for Slot and sort of his authority over the squad in the long term. Yeah, I like your 3-0 scoreline. I do think the fact I was surprised with the ball, I'm going to give them a goal. I'm going to go 3-1 to Liverpool. It's shaken me a little bit in terms of how impressed I was with Brentford, how much better they were than I expected them to be in that opening game. And I think I can see them looking to capitalize on the spaces that are left with maybe some of the Liverpool fullbacks driving forward at times, still learning the Slot system. Maybe, some mental errors might happen that they can capitalize in, and with the form that Mbeumo seems to have come into the season, I think he's going to enjoy this game. But I enjoyed this podcast, Joe. That's going to do it for another episode of A Tad Predictable. Do you have anything you want to plug, put over, or promote before we wrap up?
So I am the host or co-host of the Albion Obsessed podcast. We do match reaction, we do player ratings, we do all of that good stuff after matches and a few sporadic little sort of things that we like to do. We like to get creative. Last season, we released a documentary where we revisited our old home, the Withdean Stadium, which was really, really nice. So if you go to our YouTube channel, it's on there. It's called Our Withdean Years, and it's with two of our co-hosts who, we're at that stadium week in, week out. But yeah, just follow us at Albion Obsessed on Twitter, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, and everything like that. And come on over if you want the Albion perspective.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Yes, definitely, guys, go and check all of that out. Go check out all the content on EBL Index website, their match previews, post-match reviews, player performances, all the news you guys could wish for, especially during this busy transfer window, or it's getting busier, should I say, as we get to the tail end of it. Of course, there's a daily podcast show. It's a 2-footer podcast where Dave Hendrick discusses the hottest topics in football. That comes out Monday to Friday. Finally, also go check out the new flagship show that comes out on Sunday evenings. It's called The Final Whistle Podcast, where Nina and Ben will be hosting guests as they look back on the weekend of EPL football. I was on that show this past weekend with executive producer of this show, Guy Drinkle, because Nina and Ben were away, but they'll be back soon. So definitely go and check those out. We obviously will preview the game week. They will review it on that Sunday evening. So it's a nice way to get all of the info you need around the Premier League. Go and follow at A Tad Predictable on Twitter. Joe, I'll always call it Twitter. I don't think I'm going to change the name for that. Follow at EPL Index on Twitter. Subscribe to EPL Index podcast channel on your podcast providers. Give us 5 stars. Write some positive comments. That stuff really does help us out. I've been Tadiwa Chanakira. You can find me on the Twitter handle at Tad Predicts. A huge thank you to Obi Semenya. He's at John Empire SA, and Jody, she's at Spursy141 for our guest intros. Our producer behind the glass, Mr. Guy Drinkle. He's at Guy Drinkle on Twitter. He's been Joe at SayersBHAFC on Twitter. And remember, Chisingaperi, Chinoshura.
And still, Salah, oh, sensational! Son had a go and scored a beauty!
Oh, what a strike from Yuri Tielemans!
De Bruyne! And it is Wood-Prowse! Martinelli, gorgeous! Still going up! Oh, he's done it again!
And City have won the Premier League!
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
L is for the way.
That's who you think it is. The Grimace Mug. The Hello Kitty keychain. Barbie herself. For a limited time, your favorite McDonald's collectibles filled with memories and magic are now on collectible cups. Get one of 6 when you order a collector's meal at McDonald's with your choice of a Big Mac or 10-piece McNuggets. Come get your cup while you still can. At participating McDonald's for a limited time while supplies last.